He caught them with his bare hands. The press called him a celebrity. Imagine reaching into a hole in a sewer wall with your bare hand. You cannot see what is in there. You can hear movement. You push your hand deeper, feel the warmth of something alive, close your fingers around it, and pull out a live rat. Then you do it again, then again, for the rest of the morning. This was the daily work of the Victorian rat catcher, a licensed professional trade documented by journalists, celebrated in the press, and photographed for the public record. He was not considered unusual or desperate. He was considered skilled. He was considered brave. He was, in the specific estimation of the Victorian press, a kind of urban hero, a man who went where respectable people could not, handled what respectable people would not, and made the city function in a way it could not without him. He also had a second client list, one that the same Victorian society that celebrated his courage in the newspapers was simultaneously trying to prosecute. And by the end of this video, you will understand how a man could be a licensed professional and an illegal supplier at the same time, and why the Victorian state found this arrangement surprisingly comfortable. To understand the rat catcher's trade, you have to understand what Victorian cities were actually like at ground level, and why rats were not merely unpleasant, but a genuine and serious public health emergency. London in the mid-19th century had a rat population estimated in the tens of millions. The combination of open sewers, poorly constructed housing, abundant food waste from street markets and slaughterhouses, and the general density of urban poverty created conditions that were, from a rat's perspective, close to ideal. Rats carried disease. They contaminated food stores. They damaged the structural foundations of buildings by burrowing. They bit sleeping children in overcrowded tenements. The rat catcher existed because the rat problem existed, and because the rat problem was severe enough that property owners, business owners, and municipal authorities were willing to pay someone to address it professionally. The trade was ancient, but the Victorian version of it was distinctive. Henry Mayhew, whose documentation of London's street trades in the 1850s provides the most detailed picture we have of how the rat catcher actually worked, interviewed several practitioners and described their methods, their equipment, and their professional self-presentation in considerable detail. The Victorian rat catcher was recognizable by his costume. A distinctive waistcoat, often brightly colored, moleskin breeches, and a moleskin cap. A leather belt hung with wire cages containing live rats, which he kept as a mobile demonstration of his skills and as an advertisement of his success. He typically kept ferrets, trained to flush rats from their runs and drives them toward waiting hands or simple traps. And he often had a dog or two, specifically trained to kill rats quickly once they were in the open. But the signature skill, the one that distinguished a genuine professional from an amateur, was the bare-hand catch. A rat catcher who could reach into an occupied space and retrieve a live rat without being bitten, or who could handle a cornered rat calmly without flinching, was demonstrating a level of skill and nerve that clients paid significantly more for. Some practitioners claimed partial immunity to rat bites from years of repeated exposure. Whether this was genuine physiological adaptation or professional mythology is not entirely clear. What is clear is that they were bitten regularly, often, and continued working despite it, because a rat catcher who flinched at bites was not a rat catcher anyone would hire. The trade was licensed by local authorities in some jurisdictions, and practitioners could be found operating in the service of hospitals, warehouses, markets, farms, wealthy private households, and the expanding network of underground infrastructure that Victorian cities were building beneath their streets. They were working class, mobile, independent, and skilled in a way that the formal economy had no category for. And they had a secondary market that paid considerably better than pest control. But here is the part of this story that Victorian journalism carefully avoided putting in the same article as the celebrity profile. The rats the catcher caught alive were not just pest control. They were inventory. And the people buying that inventory were running something the law had specifically made illegal 3 years before Mayhew sat down to interview the rat catchers. The question is why nobody seemed to find this contradictory. But here is the part of this story that Victorian journalism carefully avoided putting in the same article as the celebrity profile. The rats the catcher caught alive were not just pest control. They were inventory. And the people buying that inventory were running something the law had specifically made illegal 3 years before Mayhew sat down to interview the rat catchers. The question is why nobody seemed to find this contradictory. Now here is the secondary market, and why it paid better than pest control. Rat baiting was one of the most popular gambling entertainments in Victorian Britain. The format was simple and brutal. A known quantity of rats, typically between 50 and 200, were released into a circular pit roughly 6 feet in diameter and 3 feet deep. A dog, usually a terrier specifically bred and trained for the purpose, was placed in the pit with them. Spectators bet on how long the dog would take to kill every rat in the pit. The fastest dogs became famous, their times recorded and discussed in sporting publications with the same seriousness as racehorses. The establishments that ran rat baiting kept regular schedules, maintained betting books, employed staff, and operated in the semi-open manner of an institution too popular and too profitable to be easily suppressed, despite having been made illegal by the Cruelty to Animals Act of 1835. They needed a reliable, consistent supply of live rats. The rat catcher was the obvious solution. He was already catching rats. He was already handling them alive. He was already moving through the city with cages. The transaction between the rat catcher and the rat baiting establishment was economically straightforward. Live rats in good condition paid considerably more than dead rats disposed of on site. The rat catcher who supplied a baiting pit regularly had a guaranteed market, a predictable price, and a client who had strong commercial reasons to maintain the supply relationship quietly. Mayhew's documentation of the rat catchers contains interviews in which practitioners discuss this arrangement with a frankness that suggests they did not consider it particularly remarkable or shameful. The law prohibited the baiting. It said nothing specific about catching rats and selling them to someone whose subsequent use of them was their own concern. This is the gap the rat catcher occupied. His license covered catching. What happened after the sale was beyond the formal reach of his license. Victorian law enforcement was aware of the baiting establishments. Raids occurred occasionally. Prosecutions were pursued, inconsistently. But the rat supply chain from licensed catcher to a legal pit remained largely undisturbed, because disrupting it would have required acknowledging that the two halves of the transaction were connected, and that acknowledgement would have implicated not just the rat catcher, but the clients of the baiting establishments, who were often not poor. The spectators at rat baiting included working-class gamblers, certainly. They also included members of the middle class and, in some documented instances, men of considerably higher social standing who found the entertainment compelling and considered their presence at an illegal establishment a private matter that need not trouble the public record. The law that prohibited cruelty to animals was enforced with considerably more energy against the visible poor than against the less visible wealthy. This was not a coincidence. It was the standard operation of Victorian class justice, applied to rats. But the most revealing part of this story is not the rats and not the gambling. It is what happened to the most famous rat catcher in Victorian London when the press decided to make him a celebrity. Because what they chose to include and what they chose to leave out tells you everything about how Victorian Britain managed the gap between what it celebrated and what it preferred not to officially notice. Here is the celebrity rat catcher and what his press coverage reveals about Victorian selective attention. The most documented rat catcher of the Victorian era was a man named Jack Black, who served as official rat and mole destroyer to Queen Victoria and was photographed and interviewed extensively by Henry Mayhew and others. Black was photographed in his professional costume, rat in hand, with the confidence of someone who understood that his image was part of his commercial value. He described his methods in detail, his training of ferrets and dogs, his bare-hand technique, his years of accumulated knowledge about rat behavior and movement patterns. He showed Mayhew the bite scars on his hands from decades of work. He described developing what he believed was a partial immunity to rat venom from years of repeated exposure, a claim Mayhew recorded with evident fascination. He was a genuine celebrity of his trade, the Victorian equivalent of a skilled tradesman whose mastery of something difficult and dangerous had made him interesting to a public that was safe enough from that difficulty and danger to find it entertaining. The press coverage of Jack Black discussed his official royal appointment. It discussed his costume and his ferrets. It discussed his philosophy of rat catching and his professional pride in his work. It did not discuss his relationship with the rat baiting industry. It did not need to. Everyone in the trade understood the full economic picture. The journalists who wrote about rat catchers were not uninformed about the baiting industry. They covered it in separate articles, in separate contexts, as a social problem to be addressed, a working-class vice to be reformed, an illegal activity to be suppressed. The fact that the supply chain connecting the celebrated licensed trade to the condemned illegal one ran through the same hands was not a connection the Victorian press chose to formally make. This was not naivety. It was the same mechanism at work in every part of the Victorian social arrangement we have examined in this series. Separate the thing you need from the thing you disapprove of. License the supply. Prosecute the demand, selectively. Celebrate the man who catches the rats. Do not examine too carefully what happens to the rats. The treadmill was humane because the designers said so. The rat catcher was respectable because the press said so. The gambling den was illegal because the law said so. And the supply chain connecting all three moved quietly through the back streets of Victorian London, unremarked, because remarking on it would have required someone to acknowledge that these clean institutional categories were describing the same messy, contradictory reality. Victorian Britain was very good at categories. It was less interested in what happened in the spaces between them. If this story is making you see something about how systems work that you had not quite seen before, the like is how. You tell me that. It also helps this channel reach people who have never heard these stories but would not stop watching once they did. One click does both. And if you want to keep finding the history that shows you how the categories work and what happens in the spaces between them, this channel is where that lives. Subscribe means the next story finds you. The rat catcher as a professional trade declined through the late 19th and early 20th centuries as urban sanitation improved. The construction of enclosed sewer systems, improved housing standards, better food storage technology, and eventually the development of effective rodenticide poisons changed the economics of the trade dramatically. A poison that could be laid in a building and left to work was cheaper than paying a skilled professional to catch rats by hand, and required no follow-up supply relationship with anyone. The rat baiting industry declined in parallel, as enforcement of animal cruelty legislation gradually became more consistent and the cultural appetite for the entertainment shifted. The specific combination, the licensed professional and the illegal client, the celebrated tradesman and the quietly overlooked supply chain, did not survive the structural changes that made it unnecessary. But the mechanism it operated through has not changed. Every industry that produces something with a legitimate use and an illegitimate one navigates some version of the same arrangement. The licensed supplier and the unlicensed user. The celebrated professional and the quietly tolerated downstream market. The press coverage that focuses on the respectable part of the supply chain and the enforcement that focuses on the visible part of the illegal activity. The pharmaceutical company and the opioid crisis. The weapons manufacturer and the end user. The platform and the content it hosts. The categories remain clean. The supply chains connecting them remain messy. And the mechanism for keeping these two things simultaneously true is the same one Victorian Britain used. You celebrate the rat catcher. You occasionally raid the pit. You do not look too carefully at who is walking between them. The rats are still moving. The question is whether you follow the cage or stop at the license. Here is what I want to know. Is there an industry you use or benefit from today where you suspect the legitimate part and the problematic part are more connected than the official story suggests? Name it honestly in the comments. This is just one license history issued without reading the fine print on what it was actually authorizing. You already know where to find the rest.